people having their beliefs believing in something mystical and supernatural is not a negative thing at all. In fact, it's actually positive that people seek a spiritual and metaphysical connection. But the problem is when we have a person or groups of people capable of encouraging governments to behave according to their beliefs, especially when that belief is apocalyptic. The sacrifice of the red heifer in Israel is something dangerous, because groups believe that this sacrifice is a sign of the reconstruction of the Third Temple in Jerusalem, in an area that is extremely sensitive, and we're talking precisely at a sensitive moment. This sacrifice, even though it was merely a preparatory ritual reenactment, already raises very serious alarms in the Middle East region, because it could trigger a real holy war in an area that is already quite geopolitically unstable, and that, at this very moment, is already involved in major conflicts involving a geopolitics much larger than that of the region itself. Even if I don't believe in this kind of thing, mystical or prophetic or apocalyptic, it doesn't matter. I'm not the one making state decisions. The point here is to understand how these groups have managed to co-opt the government of Israel to achieve their apocalyptic goals, making it possible for this to trigger the conflict I mentioned, and that's what we're going to look at in more detail today. But first, remember to subscribe and share the video with everyone you know. YouTube has pretty much swept this channel under the rug, not showing most of its subscribers the notifications related to the channel. You can also follow us on Telegram and Instagram using the links in the video description to stay updated on channel news and key geopolitics updates. I'm always posting some comment or relevant news there, and this channel is pretty much a cult classic, so your support is really important. I'm Delium Pera, and this is World Geopolitics. At a July 2025 event in Shiloh, West Bank, a preparatory rehearsal was held that could impact the religious and geopolitical landscape. The rehearsal was the burning of a red heifer under rabbinical supervision with all the procedures that would be applied in the official ceremony. Except for the fact that the heifer used here was not considered ritually pure because it had 2 black hairs, which disqualified it for the formal sacrifice according to halakha rules. But again, this was a rehearsal that deserves our attention. The organizers used the animal to train priests and test garments, utensils, and methods, ensuring the official sacrifice meets required standards. Look, in Judaism, the red heifer is a central element of the laws of purity, described in Numbers 19. The ashes resulting from the sacrifice and burning of the animal are used to purify utensils, priests, and everyone who will participate in the temple services. Without this purification, the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem could not take place according to Jewish tradition. That is why the appearance of a perfect red heifer, an extremely rare animal, always raises expectations among religious Jews and also among Christians who believe in apocalyptic beliefs. This 2025 rehearsal shows 2 key points. We know that they have 5 red heifers in Israel, bought from a farm in Texas, which are considered perfect and are being evaluated for the official ceremony. They bought them in 2022 and transported them by plane to Israel to bypass sanitary restrictions and cattle import regulations. The animals were registered as pets by the Israeli authorities. Now they are reaching the appropriate age, which is about 3 years old, which means that the final sacrifice should take place sometime between 2025 and 2026. This will not be just an isolated symbolic act, but an organized movement to try to restore practices from the temple period. And this tradition holds that, according to the Jewish interpretation, before the construction of the Third Temple, considered a messianic milestone, it would be necessary to perform the sacrifice of a perfect red heifer. Use its ashes to purify utensils and people. This requirement is seen by many religious groups as a precondition for the Messianic era for evangelical Christians attuned to this eschatology. This event is seen as fulfilling biblical prophecy and marking a milestone before the second coming of Christ, as noted in Revelation. How does this impact geopolitics? Because even if you don't believe in the prophetic and metaphysical aspect behind this, Influential and wealthy political groups do believe in it and are conditioning the behavior of nation-states to act accordingly. So, even if all of this is nonsense, the point is that it will have a real impact that will affect the regional geopolitics of the Middle East and consequently the entire world. This issue deserves attention because it has explosive potential, since tradition places the Third Temple on the Temple Mount, a site that is currently occupied by the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, two very sacred places. In Islam, building a Jewish structure on that site would be viewed as an intolerable violation, likely to cause regional or even global religious conflict. For this reason, these rehearsals raise certain alarms, because they signal that there is an organized movement that wants to regain sovereignty. Officially, of course, the Israeli government avoids committing to a reconstruction of the temple, but very influential religious sectors within the Israeli government openly support this agenda. And Israeli politicians have already expressed symbolic support for the idea, knowing that this will mobilize internal religious bases. Christian Zionist leaders, especially in the United States, see this preparation as the fulfillment of the scriptures and therefore financially support projects related to the temple. On the other hand, Arab countries and Islamic organizations, such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, interpret any move in this direction as a direct provocation. This could worsen already high tensions in the Middle East. Although it may seem unimportant, this event cannot be seen as trivial because it demonstrates operational capability, with trained priests, proper utensils, and a clear ritual model. The approach to this goal, because if the complete ceremony depends only on finding this 100% pure animal, and if they already exist close to the ideal age, the performance of the definitive sacrifice could be very near and will have a psychological impact. For some Jewish groups, this rehearsal strengthens hope for the temple's restoration. For Christians with an apocalyptic view, it's a sign of the times. For Islam, it's a red alert. An official sacrifice announced to the world will probably trigger protests, rhetorical escalation, and maybe even more violence, especially if this is accompanied by speeches linking it to the future rebuilding of the temple and after the official sacrifice if it happens. The organizers should theoretically store the pure heifer's ashes to purify the instruments, priests, and worship space. This paves the way for activities on the Temple Mount, even if they are initially limited. Any physical act of preparation at that location could already be seen as highly provocative by Islamic governments around the world. Also, the Messianic narrative will grow stronger among radical Jewish groups and apocalyptic Christians, possibly affecting Israel's political decisions and alliances with external actors. The tension between political faith and geostrategy will become inevitable, and all of this is very interesting, but the fundamental question is, who is behind this? And it's not just one or two people, but several influential people and a very influential group called Chabad Lubavitch, which I will explain in more detail. The Chabad Lubavitch movement, one of the main branches of Hasidic Judaism, is not the only one involved in this agenda. However, it holds significant ideological and political influence in modern Orthodox Judaism, with ties to parts of the Israeli government and Jewish communities. This group has its world headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, but also has a strong presence in Israel. They advocate for an intense messianic vision, believing that the era of the Messiah can and should be accelerated by human actions, including the fulfillment of commandments related to the temple. Many of their followers see the late Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who died in 1994, as the Messiah himself, or as someone who would reveal this after his death. This led to the Meshichist movement. The Lubavitch Chabad backs efforts to prepare Jewish society for the temple's rebuilding. Although it is not the group leading the Red Heifer Sacrifice project, this front is more associated with the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. There are ideological convergences because both believe that fulfilling these precepts will hasten the messianic redemption. And the logic is clear. Without purification there is no temple, without the temple there is no Messiah, so preparing everything for the temple is a spiritual work that will bring redemption closer. Chabad has a strong influence on Israeli politicians, including within Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, through rabbis, advisors, and religious blocs. And this is one of those situations where people like to put little flags in their usernames and cheer. or pick a side of good versus evil to root for. In the geopolitical scene, things get complicated because these messianic movements, as well as Chabad and Lubavitch, have deep connections with people linked to the American government, from the executive, judiciary, and legislative branches, as well as with the Russian government across all sectors. So, it's a very deep and very narrow triangle, which makes it much more complicated to understand what might be happening here in the United States. Chabad exerts indirect influence through powerful community networks, which often interact with pro-Israel politicians, including figures like President Donald Trump, who has already received public blessings from some Chabad rabbis. This influence guarantees financial resources and political support for radical religious agendas, even if they are not officially endorsed by the state. Chabad hasn't publicly said, "We are organizing the sacrifice of the red heifer," but there are clear indications. A 2025 jury rehearsal was organized by Bonei Israel and had the ideological support of sectors linked to the Temple Institute. Chabad does not appear as an organizer, but its leaders considered this movement a positive sign within the divine plan. Traditionally, rabbinic sources state that only 9 red heifers have been sacrificed in Jewish history, from the temples of Moses to the destruction of the Second Temple. The sage Maimonides from the 12th century recorded this number, and he wrote that the 10th heifer would be prepared by the Messiah himself, directly linking the heifer ritual to the future Messianic era. Many interpret that the appearance of this 10th perfect heifer would signal that the coming of the Messiah is near. This background explains the enormous expectation that was created when, after 2 millennia without reliable reports of the animal, perfect red heifers were identified in modern times. The rehearsal ceremony was held late afternoon on July 1, 2025 at an undisclosed location in Kilo West Bank as prescribed biblically. The heifer was then slaughtered, and afterwards it was completely burned on a large wood pyre in a blazing fire, along with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread as described in Numbers 19. Rabbis and assistants participated in the act, wearing white garments, under the coordination of Rabbi Itzhak Mamu, one of the leaders of the temple reconstruction movement. The heifer in question was then taken to Shiloh in the West Bank, to the mountain where it was sacrificed. Photos and videos released later show the intense bonfire consuming the animal while prayers were recited at sunset. As explained, organizers saw this first burning as experimental and educational. The chosen location was intentionally a remote area to avoid causing unnecessary friction, but respecting an essential requirement. Ideally, the sacrifice of the ewe should take place on a hill with a direct view of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, according to Rabbi Mamu. The Torah requires that the ewe be burned outside the sacred area, but facing the location of the sanctuary so that the officiating priest can sprinkle the ewe's blood in the direction of the Holy of Holies. Therefore, the ultimate goal will be to perform the ritual on the Mount of Olives east of the Old City of Jerusalem, a vantage point overlooking the plateau where the ancient temples once stood. Rabbi Mamu himself revealed that he had acquired a plot of land on the Mount of Olives 12 years ago in secret, specifically for this purpose, waiting for the right moment. This rehearsal was made possible thanks to a collaboration between Jews, religious groups, and evangelical Christians, with one of the main sponsors and creators of the project. Byron Stinson, a Texas businessman and Zionist Christian, has long dreamed of seeing the red heifer prophecy fulfilled. The Israeli government's relationship with pro-temple movements is complex. Since 1967, all Israeli governments have officially maintained the status quo policy. On the Temple Mount, this means publicly acknowledging that the Islamic sanctuary Ali remains under the religious administration of the Jordanian Waqf, allowing non-Muslim visits at restricted times, but prohibiting non-Islamic prayers or rituals at the site. And in January 2023, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with King Abdullah II of Jordan, where he promised to maintain the status quo on the Temple Mount, assuring no changes in custody or worship permissions at the holy site. Netanyahu even stated that Israel would continue to protect the authority of the Islamic Waqf over the Al-Aqsa compound. However, From the moment Netanyahu became politically dependent on nationalist, religious, and ultra-Orthodox parties to form the government, as happened after the 2022 elections, the demands of these groups for greater access to Jewish rights on the Temple Mount gained strength within the governing coalition. Now, with Netanyahu isolated in the Israeli government, his most loyal supporters are those pushing for the temple's construction. Several members of the current cabinet are openly supporters of the temple movement. The most emblematic is Itamar Ben-Gvir, leader of the Otzma Yehudit party and current Minister of National Security. He is known for openly advocating for the end of the ban on Jewish prayer at the Al-Aqsa compound and for the construction of a Jewish prayer area at the site, as an initial step toward a future temple. On January 3, 2023, just days before taking office, Ben-Gvir publicly visited the Mount, walking for 15 minutes on the esplanade. And even though technically it was a visit within the permissions, since Jews have the right to visit as tourists, under police escort the gesture had repercussions. Not only the Palestinians but also the Arab countries denounced the visit as an invasion and a provocation. Jordan summoned the Israeli ambassador to protest. The United Arab Emirates and China called an emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council over this simple visit. In practice, the rise of this religious movement to power during Netanyahu's current term has resulted in greater influence of the temple movements over Israeli state institutions. Reports from Israeli NGOs, such as Yir Amin, indicate that government ministries have begun to actively collaborate on projects related to the Third Temple. When the red heifers I mentioned arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in September 2022, Netanyahu, Isaac, the Director General of the Ministry for Jerusalem Affairs and Heritage, made a point of attending the reception and giving a speech. In honor of the occasion, Isaac publicly confirmed that his office was funding improvements in the Mount of Olives area where the sacrifice is planned to take place, a clear sign of government endorsement for this project. In other words, public money is being invested in initiatives related to the red heifer and the construction of the temple. Most Israeli societies do not support such ventures. In this sense, analysts point out that the vast majority of Israeli Jews do not wish to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque or even start a holy war, especially because many are not even religious and see talk of the Third Temple as cheap or dangerous mysticism. The current approach under Netanyahu's administration seems to be allowing silent advances. The presence of religious Jews on the Temple Mount has increased significantly, reaching record numbers in permitted visits, and groups have managed to pray discreetly under police protection. But the current movement in favor of the Third Temple would not be complete without considering the role of Zionist Christians abroad, especially from the United States. Over the past decades, significant segments of American evangelicals have developed strong theological and financial engagement with projects related to the restoration of Israel according to biblical prophecies. Christian Zionism refers to unconstitutional political support for Israel, to specific initiatives such as funding settlements in the West Bank and helping Jewish immigration to the Holy Land, and more recently, direct support for the idea of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Many of these groups adhere to interpretations like dispensationalist theology, which teaches that the construction of a new Jewish temple is a prerequisite for the return of Christ. They point to biblical passages such as Thessalonians and Revelation that speak of an active sanctuary of God. Recently, Rabbi Avraham Feldman, a modern Jewish commentator, observed that the gematria for Nero Oriental matches that of Bashar al-Assad. When they consider certain internal values, adding 5, 7, 1, the idea would be that when Damascus falls, Assad would also fall, announcing a time of peace favorable to the coming of the Messiah, son of David. A scenario where, with the fall of this Near Eastern leader, all Eastern rule would collapse, preparing the ground for the tranquility of Israel. Preceding then the arrival of the Messiah, and the recent attacks on Iran would be another step in that direction. There is a narrative in Messianic circles about a triangular symbolic configuration. Between Damascus being the direct object of the prophecy of destruction, Jerusalem, the spiritual center of the temple, and Tehran being the political spiritual center associated with prophecies like Gog and Magog from Ezekiel. Although this triangulation is not widely mapped as a geographic Star of David, in prophetic visions, some place Damascus as one of the vertices of a larger symbol involving Jerusalem, the central point, and Tehran, perhaps as the northern counterpoint. Thus, different groups began to look for ways to actively help the Jews achieve these goals. In addition to the aforementioned Byron Stinson, the then Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, known for his evangelical convictions, also began to support major Christian organizations. Zionists have also supported the event. The Christian Broadcasting Network, founded by Pat Robertson, frequently produces reports about the preparations for the Third Temple, aimed at a Christian audience. Influential evangelical leaders in the United States, such as John Haig, Joel Rosenberg, and Perry Stone, often mention the Third Temple in sermons and raise donations to support the cause of building the Third Temple. In Brazil, the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, led by Bishop Edir Macedo, built a massive replica of Solomon's Temple in São Paulo, highlighting how the temple's image captivates followers. While this work isn't directly related, Edir Macedo often preaches about Israel's prophecies, and some of his pastors publicly celebrate the news of the red heifers as a sign of the apocalypse. In Central America, picturesque cases include Guatemala, where the evangelical former president even donated a plot of land in Jerusalem for an educational project of the Temple Institute. In addition to moving the Guatemalan embassy to Jerusalem as a gesture aligned with this prophetic agenda. But the issue is much more complicated, and there is an extreme irony behind it. Because while Orthodox Jewish groups believe that the construction of the Third Temple will bring their Messiah who will deliver Israel and guarantee its sovereignty, guaranteeing the law of the Torah over the face of the earth, evangelical groups who believe in the construction of the Third Temple think that building the Third Temple will convert the Jews to believe that Jesus is their Lord, as well as bring the Antichrist. In other words, the two groups are collaborating, but for completely opposite reasons that cancel each other out, which could be a problem after all this chaos we're seeing now in Israel. The Third Temple issue divides opinions and concerns security sectors. Although only a small minority of Jews are actively engaged in these preparations, this minority is precisely the most politically well-positioned at this moment. The national religious parties see full Jewish sovereignty over the Temple Mount as a national goal, while secular parties see this kind of agenda as something dangerous, capable of igniting conflict with neighbors, isolating Israel internationally, and increasing the feeling of international hostility against Jews. Even many religious Jews, such as the ultra-Orthodox non-Zionists, vehemently oppose any human attempt to rebuild the temple. Now, what creates unlikely allies between ultra-Orthodox rabbis and liberal secularists against the temple activists? From the Palestinian and Muslim world perspective, the issue of the Third Temple is seen as a non-negotiable red line for the Palestinians. Al-Haram al-Sharif in East Jerusalem, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are located. This is one of the pillars of their national and religious identity. Groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad exploit this to their advantage. Any news about Jewish activities at the holy site is used by these groups to inflame emotions. Not by chance, Hamas named its surprise attack on October 7, 2023 against Israel Operation Al-Aqsa in Danger or Al-Aqsa Flood. Regional leaders, like the King of Jordan, warn that interfering with Al-Aqsa is like playing with dynamite, with the potential to trigger a widespread holy war. Arab countries such as Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates signed the Abraham Accords with Israel. They did so under the premise that Israel would maintain respect for Islamic holy sites. If that trust is shaken, those agreements could collapse. Saudi Arabia itself, which had been flirting with recent normalization with Israel, was analyzed as unlikely to do so. And again, the point isn't whether I believe in it or not. I don't believe it, but it doesn't matter. Because groups that believe in this and have political and financial power are managing to co-opt the Israeli government to act according to their interests. That's what matters, not whether this prophecy is true or not. We have to focus on what is actually being done. The main issue is that these groups clearly face opposition. The other Jews, the vast majority of Jews in Israel, don't believe in this and are not willing to fight for a holy war involving this kind of superstition. This, of course, complicates Israel's politics. But we'll have to wait and see if this will actually happen, and if it does, how the world will react to it. Above all, the group that has this irony I mentioned earlier, where Jews believe in something that cancels itself out, and evangelicals believe in something else, so it's a very complicated religious and geopolitical issue. Let's hope this doesn't escalate into a third world war. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know. This helps the World Geopolitics channel to keep going, and consider becoming a member. As a member, not only will you get early access to videos, but you'll also have access to exclusive live streams, exclusive Telegram groups, and even exclusive videos. There's the intelligence course, videos on United States geopolitical history, Chinese military history, more recently the spirit of India, and more. So, if you become a member, not only are you ensuring that the World Geopolitics channel stays alive, but you'll also have access to a deep collection of knowledge that isn't easily found on the internet.